Hunter x Hunter doesn't have my favorite ending in anime, but comes pretty damn close, managing to be deeply cathartic even as it tempts the viewer with future adventures. I believe this effectiveness comes from the show taking 3 series-spanning frameworks and successfully uniting them into a single, multi-level climax. Endings are a loose concept in Hunter x Hunter, and that's also true of this video. I sort of mean everything from Gon-san onwards and sort of mean the literal final scene. What I do not mean is the manga. Dark Continent is strictly off limits. Here we go. First and most important is the long arc of Gon and Killua's relationship. The boys' development is best understood as 2 parts of a reciprocal transformation, with the protagonist becoming more similar as the story progresses. Or, to be a little more accurate, they both use the friendship to bring out a hidden part of themselves which comes easily to the other. When these 2 met, each immediately sensed that the other had something they needed. Killua saw the courage to open up emotionally, and for Gon, there was a simple reality that unless he took a few levels in badass, he would be lucky to survive the search for gain, much less complete it. Not only do they succeed in borrowing from each other's personalities, but these traits were eventually revealed to run much deeper in the character who worked on them than the one they came to naturally. When the pressure increases, Gon's chipper attitude starts to fall away. But his need to win doesn't go anywhere. Unlike Killua's ever-growing compassion, which often comes out during intense moments of conflict. By the end of Chimera Ants, these parallel arcs have reached a final conclusion, and we get a near-perfect role reversal, with Gon being a violent hard-ass while Killua just scrambles to take care of the people around him. That the same journey led to such different places really stresses the importance of their initial motivations. Both protagonists have been using the adventure to cope with a bad family situation, but while Killua has been trying to distance himself from a dysfunctional home life, Gon's desires are a lot more complicated. His enthusiasm makes it easy to forget, but Gon's admiration for hunters comes from a really dark place. It's the way he's rationalized parental abandonment, with Gon trying to justify Gin's choices by emulating his lifestyle, and he's become emotionally dependent on the idea that being an adventurer is fun. When Kite died, not only did Gon lose a developing father figure who outclassed Gin in every way, but that person sacrificed himself specifically so the boys could escape the insanity which is the world of hunters. It was a moment perfectly crafted to shatter Gon's delusions, and it's not surprising he lost it. Then, in the chairman election arc, we get a pretty clear statement as to what this all meant. Gon is lying in a heap, receiving support from a group you could legitimately describe as society minus Gin, and not only is Killua the one working to save him, he's doing it by being the sweetest kid to ever live. Killua's return to the compound was great because it recontextualized his character almost as much as the incident with Pitou did the Gon's, but in the exact opposite direction. We had gotten hints that Killua's childhood was not totally devoid of warmth or care, but seeing him with Alika reveals that much of his life has been spent playing with his sister, meaning that his arc was never about learning to have relationships so much as being true to the feelings he already had. Putting a timer on Mrs. Zoldyck's life was a beautiful moment of irony. Not only did Killua reject the callous attitude of his family, he did it through the superior knowledge of something's powers he gained by accepting Alika, while also forcing his father to admit that he's secretly just as sentimental. Then, Killua gets to leave with Alika in hand, setting out to save the person who gave him the confidence to pull this all off. What can I say? It's just great writing, and deeply interwoven with the second major resolution, Gon's reunion with Gin. It's hard to outright hate the man, but Gin is not worthy of Gon's adoration, and their big moment together will not land if the audience is rolling their eyes at his lame attempt to act like a parent. So Togashi, blessed be his name, finally takes Gin to task by having him get punched in the face while his entire social circle cheers. This is exactly the emotional palate cleanser we needed before hearing Gin's side of the story, and having Leorio deliver the beating was just brilliant. There is a colossal power gap between these two, and not only does that deepen the humiliation, it lets the audience know that Gin chose to take the hit, meaning that, in some weird way, he finds this just as cathartic as we do. Also, as annoyed as I got with Gin's Karma Houdini nonsense, Leorio's lack of Nen powers was almost as frustrating, and using one to resolve the other was just perfect. However, as Gon climbs the world tree, there's a lingering fear that Gin is going to piss us off, either by making excuses or getting too sentimental. But instead, Gin simply lays out a philosophy of life which explains his choices without trying to justify them, and which basically spells out the appeal of the show. This makes us realize that if we've loved the story so far, we have to accept Gin as a character, because on some level, we're just like him. And if we're going to be excited about the Dark Continent, we have to acknowledge this never would have happened had he stayed on the island. The third of these overarching patterns is kind of weird, and has to do with how Togashi rations out information. No show has ever won me over like Hunter x Hunter. Like a lot of fans, I barely made it through the first few arcs, only to love it by the end. But it isn't just that I had this reaction to the story as a whole. Almost everything in the show followed the same trajectory. Most arcs in Hunter x Hunter begin as muddled, ambiguous situations with incredible potential to suck, but end with intense emotional climaxes, often involving characters the audience wasn't even aware of in the first act. In the same vein, characters are introduced long before we get the little nuances which will eventually make us love them, and in the interim we fill the gaps with their surface characteristics, which often invoke worn-out cliches or just look kinda stupid. The only major exception being Uvojin, who is transparently awesome from the moment he arrives. The greatest example, without a doubt, is Bisky. When this worthless tsundere bitch stepped on screen, I immediately started writing the arc in my head, bracing myself for endless scenes of her getting rescued by Gon and Killua, after which she would repay them with petty drama and unwanted flirting. And it seems that Togashi had me right where he wanted, because that is decidedly not the direction he went in. This trick of introducing ambiguous story elements which ends on incredible high notes permeates Hunter x Hunter, giving a unique rhythm to the narrative. There's a distinct rise and fall as we move from one arc to another, but also a sense that the show as a whole is constantly reaching new heights and building on previous events, with the world and cast growing larger, deeper, and more interconnected. Critically, this pattern can be applied to the two framing devices we've already covered. With Gin, it's fairly obvious. He's a lovable deadbeat who gets redeemed in the final scene. But the main characters also see drastic improvements as the show reaches a conclusion. I started warming up to Gon in Heaven's Arena, but struggled to understand what I saw as an inhumanly positive worldview. And watching it crumble away in Chimera Ants was when I finally accepted him as a protagonist. People like to give Gon a hard time about his fight with Pito, but personally, I had never been more on Gon's side. He wasn't trying to save the world or make some philosophical point. Gon was just crying as he turned bone fragments into smaller bone fragments. It wasn't pretty, but it was something to hold on to, and it let me finally see him as a fleshed-out, believable character. Killua also got a boost for handling the fallout, but in his case he was wonderful the whole time and simply ended as the best guy ever. This all starts to come together in the final arc. Obviously, the narrative thrust of these episodes is Killua's quest to save Gon, but mixing it with the election was a great decision. Not only did it set up the meeting with Gin by forcing him to stay in one place, it showed most of the massive cast acting as a single community, driving home the story's incredible scope while reminding the viewer that the pieces still connect into a single whole, getting us mentally prepared for the finale. By the last episode, Gon has been physically healed by Killua's sister and worked through his trauma by speaking to Kite, which Gin had encouraged him to do. So as Gon approaches the World Tree, 2 of the 3 series-spanning frameworks have been resolved in ways which are profound, cathartic, satisfying, and deeply intertwined. Just in time for the last scene, which completes the third. While we're still processing what Gin said to Gon, we get hit with a montage which calls back to events spanning the entire story. As we're forced to reflect on how something as innocuous as the Hunter exam led to this moment, we realize that this motif of rescuing troubled story elements doesn't just apply to the arcs and characters, but to the series as a whole, forming a 148-episode fractal in the shape of this pattern. And as you sit in awe of one of the most ambitious feats of story crafting ever, you're treated to a series of clips which basically spell out the themes of the show. This world is totally out of control, and while that makes it dangerous as shit, it's also a place of incredible opportunity. The adventure turned pretty ugly at times, and not everyone made it, but everyone had a chance to do what they had to do, and there's something really special about that. I have caught up with the manga, and believe it or not, I think Togashi could keep this ball rolling, but for obvious reasons, I'd rather not get my hopes up. And if nothing else, I'm deeply grateful he gave the anime such a strong place to end on. If you're still here, I appreciate it. Thank you for watching.